Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Rhoda and I'm a doctor working in the UK, and today's video is all about learning styles. This may be a little bit of a controversial video because I'm going to be debunking the common learning style we've probably all heard of, the VARK model, or the visual, auditory, reading and writing and kinesthetic learning style, and provide lots of evidence to say why it doesn't work and it doesn't actually lead to improved grades, and actually talk about a learning style that you may not have heard of but has actually led to really big changes when it came to the way I approached my learning and the way I approached my studying. Without further ado, let's get into the video. So a little bit of background when it comes to learning. It is something that I hold really close to my heart, and I actually really enjoy teaching and learning, as sad as that may sound. But over the years, I've noticed there's this trend in schools, colleges, universities that we really get taught what to learn, but not actually how to learn. And I've said this in a previous video as well. It may not seem especially groundbreaking, but when you know how you learn, it really helps you become more self-aware of the way in which you like to take in information, and it allows you to figure out kind of the strengths and weaknesses of that as well. For me personally, knowing how I like to learn has really helped me turn into a much more effective learner. I've only figured this out through years and years of postgraduate training and university and college and high school. When you become a much better and effective learner, it actually makes it easier for you to take in new information and actually learn. And dare I say, it actually makes it more of an enjoyable experience as well when it becomes easier. When it comes to learning styles, a really common one that we've probably all heard of and your teachers probably told you about, or you had to do a questionnaire on it, is VARK, or VARK. This is a learning style that has been going around for years and years and years, and it essentially says that we are 4 types of learners. So a visual learner, so someone who likes to learn through pictures; an auditory learner, someone who likes to listen; reading and writing, so someone who takes in through notes; and kinesthetic, so more of kind of a little bit of everything. So I found myself through the years not really fitting into any of those specific learning styles, because I learn differently depending on what kind of information I'm learning, or when I'm learning it, or at what level I'm learning things at. And it was only a couple of years ago when I was introduced to this other learning style that I've never heard of that really finally made sense to me. And there's actually a lot of evidence that supports that the current learning style we all know about, or VARK, is actually not very beneficial. And one of the arguments that were put place into these studies was that when we learn, we don't just use one sense, so we don't just listen, we don't just read and whatever. Learning is actually a multi-sensory experience. And also it actually showed that it may even restrict kind of our learning. So when someone says I'm a auditory learner, so I like to listen, so that's through things like lectures or someone talking at you, we know from lots of evidence that listening to someone explain something to you is the most passive way of learning and is actually really ineffective. And someone who's a reading and writing type learner who kind of takes in notes and reads, again, reading is just a very passive way of taking in information. I now know that one of the best ways to actually learn is to engage with the material, is to actively try and understand the material and whatever you're trying to learn, make sense of it, give it meaning, test yourself on it, explain it to yourself, explaining it to others. Those are the forms of learning that actually really do make a difference when it comes to effective studying. The learning style I'm going to be talking about is by Honey and Mumford, and these were 2 theorists who came up with this kind of 4 distinct styles. So there's the activist, the reflector, the theorist, and the pragmatist. I was introduced to this model by my supervisor when I was studying for my clinical skill assessment, which is one of the GP exams that you have to do in order to become a fully qualified GP. So it's a practical exam where you're assessed on your history-taking abilities, diagnosis, examination of the patient, etc. So the activist is someone who likes to learn by doing it, kind of pretty much getting their hands dirty, getting stuck in straight away and figuring out the rest of it later. So a really good example would be if you bought kind of a wardrobe or something from IKEA and you had to assemble it. This person would not read the instructions, just have a general look at the pictures and try and figure it out as they go along. These people tend to be really good in group discussions, coming up with new ideas. Then there are reflectors. So these are people who don't jump into the deep end straight away and actually like to plan and prepare things before they actually dive into it. And I think this is probably me. So I'm the kind of person who likes to know what they need to know. So when it comes to an exam, look at the curriculum, look at any feedback from previous exam years, see where people went wrong and make sure I don't make that same mistake. And reflectors are people who really like to get feedback from others, whether that's peers, teachers, friends. And then theorists are people who really like to understand the concept before being able to apply it themselves. So they're the people who are always asking the why and how of something. They like to understand the theory before just writing notes on anything, and they like to map things out step by step in like a logical sequence so it kind of makes sense in their head. One of the examples is the heart pumps blood around the body. Okay, what does that mean? Like, how does it do that? So a theorist would be someone who's trying to figure out like the little steps that are involved in that statement, just trying to find out the actual details of it, the why and the how. And then there's someone who's a pragmatist, and this is the kind of person who really likes to learn by being able to apply it into real world examples, otherwise it doesn't make any sense to them. This person, an example would be, I don't know, they were learning about heart failure and they knew that there are certain symptoms involved in heart failure, so they read about it, but it doesn't really make a lot of sense to them because it's just words on paper. So these people would go onto the wall, find the patient with heart failure, and then take a history from them and then examine them for their symptoms. And in that way, they've seen it in real life and then they can make sense of it more when it comes to their note taking. So these are more practical people. This applies to other subjects, like for example mathematics. You're learning about percentages, fractions. You don't really see the value in it until you can apply it to real life. So 50% sale, you know, in a shop, that type of thing. So those are the four distinct learning styles. And when you know what kind of a learner you are, it helps you kind of expand your spectrum as well in terms of other ways you can take in information, because you don't have to be stuck in one style. You can use lots of different bits from all these other styles to kind of hone your own kind of learning skills. And it really helped me become a more all-rounded learner, because you can adapt depending on what kind of information you're being presented with. Once you've kind of figured that out, there is something called the Kolb Learning cycle, which is almost like the process of learning and how to become more and more effective at what you're trying to learn. So again, I was using this when I was practicing for my CSA. This cycle kind of goes through the logical experiences that we have when it comes to learning. And this cycle really places a lot of emphasis on reflection, and this doesn't just apply to studying but also real life, because when you reflect on life experiences or your performance when it comes to studying, then that is the only way where you figure out what your strengths and your weaknesses are. When you know what your weaknesses are, then you can work on that and actually try and improve yourself, and that's the way you progress. So this cycle goes through the first stage, which is called experience. So that is the actual doing bit of it. So an example would be you're writing an essay, you're drafting it, so you've done your draft. So that's the kind of experience. Then you go through something called reflection, and that is where you get feedback that the lecturer or the supervisor is giving you. You look at it, and then you go through something called conceptualizing it. You've taken that feedback and you're trying to figure out how to improve it. So for example, your supervisor said to you, you're not referencing enough, your introduction is too vague. So you're like, okay, how can I make it better? So I need to use more journals and cite more papers in order to get more references, or I need to include more facts and figures in my introduction. And then you move into the last part of the cycle, which is where you're redrafting it, having figured out what you need to improve. And then you just keep going round and round in that cycle. And this may sound a little bit dramatic, but that was the light bulb moment where I noticed that I was actually improving patient on patient when I was studying for my CSA. I would be taking a history from a patient, my supervisor would be observing me, so that's the experience. Then he would reflect, so he would tell me what did I do well, what didn't do so well, and then he would give me feedback, and then I'd conceptualize it, so figure out how to actually improve. So an example would be he'd say, Rhoda, you're using too many closed questions, or you didn't ask this patient about their social history. And then my conceptualizing would be, okay, how do I improve it? Okay, ask more open questions. How do I make sure I remember to ask the social history? Maybe have a checklist that I write and have that in front of me when I'm talking with the patient. Having got all of that feedback, written it down, thought about it a little bit, how am I going to improve it? Then I move into active experimentation, which is where I'm going to be taking a history from another patient and implement the changes that I wanted to make and see how that works. And then every single time I was going through that cycle, I was noticing that every time I tweaked something, and then those small incremental changes over time make such a big difference. So when I was looking at myself, because I was recording myself at day 1 and then watching my videos at day 30, noticed a massive improvement. It was groundbreaking, you know, when I figured out this cycle of learning and these different learning styles. I'm more of a reflector, so someone who really likes to get feedback and watches people doing it before I kind of dive into it myself. So when it comes to figuring out your learning style and going through it, always try other ways of learning, like take tips from other people, teacher suggestions or whatever, and you'd be really surprised to find that actually you've always been telling yourself, oh, I'm not a very this learner, I'm not a very that learner. You'll be really surprised to find that actually that may be the better way of learning. So one of the important things and messages to take from this really is learning is like an endless experience. It's not something that stops. It's not an absolute thing. It just keeps going. It's on a continuum. It's amazing. You know, learning is amazing and knowledge is power, you know, as they say. I think that's everything. I hope you found that useful. Please like the video if you took something from this. Subscribe to the channel because it really helped me grow, and I'll see you in the next video.